Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Music Impossible. My name is Professor Jim, and it's good to see you again here in our next series of lessons. We're going to start diving into the staff and parts of the staff and clefs. And today is more about the clef side, a little bit of a history lesson to kind of get you up to speed on where these clefs came from and understand the historical relevance of them to help understand them as their function in today's music. We're going to start with probably something that's a complete review for all of you, and that's just parts of the staff here. Pretty easy stuff for most of you guys. This is not going to be a hard thing. We see a treble clef here on the left. We're going to learn about the clefs in a minute. Ignore the treble clef, but let's just start talking about some nomenclature, if you will, so that when we talk about these things later on, we're going to understand how lines and spaces are designed. So most music staffs in today's music have 5 lines and 4 spaces. Notice that we start from the bottom and work our way up. So line number 1 is the bottom line, line number 5 is the top line. So if we refer to something, hey, line number 4 in bass clef is an F, we get to talk that way and you understand why we're saying what we're saying. Same thing with the spaces. We're going to start from the bottom and work our way up. 5 lines, 4 spaces. Now, over time, there has certainly been different types of clefs along the way. One of the things we're going to talk about early on is the C clef. And the C clef looks like this. Let me take you over here. The C clef is, we're going to see these right here. So they look like sort of a fancy looking 3, and we're going to learn what all these mean in just a minute. But all of these represent what we call a C clef, and they have different functions. And historically, the C clef was around when we had something called monophonic music, and this is before harmony even existed. So we're going to go way back before the 10th, 9th century. And in fact, before harmony even existed, we were just singing sort of these whole notes, Gregorian monk chants or single lines of music. There was no harmony, there was no choirs, there was no orchestras. Everything was very simple. Mono meaning one, phonic meaning sound, so one sound at a time. And because of that, they created these clefs that represented each individual voice. We'll go back to our Sibelius file, and this clef here on the left was the soprano clef. And so if we look at this one, we've got the soprano clef right here. And see that where the curves come together, the middle of this number 3, if you will, is middle C, hence C clef. And then once we go up the different voices, we have the mezzo-soprano clef. And so as they were writing these melodies, they said, you know what, women's voices, the higher women's voices, the soprano clef, we need middle C to be way down here on the bottom of the staff because a lot of the notes they're going to be singing are going to be up here. And to avoid a bunch of ledger lines, that's how they created the clef for the different voices. And as we go lower in pitch, mezzo-soprano, for the lower women voices to the lowest female voice as alto clef is right here in the middle. More on alto clef in a little bit. And then as we continue to go down, we have the higher men's voice of tenor clef right here. And then finally, we have a baritone clef right there. Baritone clef is right here. So middle C would be up here on the top line, line number 5. And because a lot of men's voices sing below middle C, then all of the notes are going to be down here anyway. We're avoiding a lot of ledger lines by having this movable C clef. We can move it to any line we wanted to and have that represent middle C. Now, once we got to around the Middle Ages, the sort of 1500s, 1600s, we started to experiment with more harmony. Now, before that, we had sort of musical harmony, if you will, there's a guy you may have heard of from geometry class, Pythagoras, and his Pythagorean theorem. You might remember that from geometry class. Now, this guy figured out mathematically how harmonies worked, and he had figured out like fifths and fourths and octaves and things that he discovered that there was these ratios that existed in sound. And so during the 5th century, when he was creating his thing, we didn't even have harmony even on the radar for another 1,000 years or so. But mathematically, we had it figured out. And the Greeks continued along the lines as Aristotle came in and Socrates. They started to develop the idea of sound and harmonies and sort of stepped on the shoulders of Pythagoras. Now, as we fast forward a little bit, we are starting to get into more harmonic music in the 1500s. And as we travel through the centuries, all the way up to the late 18th century into the 19th century, about till 1850, which was the end of the Romantic period. The Romantic period is when harmony really became harmony as we know it today. And since then, harmony hasn't changed all that much. Stylistically, we have developed all different styles of music. We're no longer an orchestral-only society, right? There's rock music and blues and jazz and all these different styles of music that have developed with roughly the same harmonies that were being used at the end of the Romantic period. And so now that we're looking into more harmonies, well, now we had to change our clefs. And we need a little more widely used clef system, hence the development here of the treble clef and the bass clef, where middle C on the treble clef is going to be just below the staff here. So if we're going to put a C, we're going to put it right there. There's middle C on the treble clef. Middle C on the bass clef is going to be above the staff because a lot of times our bass clef is going to operate for lower pitched instruments where treble clef is operating for higher pitched instruments. And so middle C has to be moved to those spots. But because of this allowed us to create a lot more types of music as we developed our harmonic structure or our polyphonic idea of how music is created. Poly meaning many, phonic meaning sound. Hence, we're moving away from this movable C clef, from a monophonic to a polyphonic society with treble and bass clefs. Now, what's interesting about treble clef and bass clef here is when we play a melody into, let's do it in treble clef. And let's do Twinkle Twinkle. We go up to this high G. Right, so this is the beginning of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. And the reason why we needed these different clefs is because if I wanted to have that same melody in bass clef, look at all those ledger lines. These are the exact same notes, treble clef and bass clef. So it just didn't make sense to have just the one clef. Conversely, some clefs that still exist today, we have the alto clef here, because there's certain instruments like violas that sort of teeter between that treble and bass clef world, and so having sort of that middle of the road C clef still in existence helps with ledger lines in that music. So if I was writing this for viola, I would probably maybe put it on alto clef. Certainly, if I wanted to take all of this music down, let's take it down a third. Let's take everything down a third here too. It's not going to sound like Twinkle Twinkle anymore. But now I have a nice little harmony part. And if I were to have this harmony part here in treble clef, look at how it gets a little bit too cloggy, a little bit too many ledger lines. This is certainly doable, but certainly once you get below 2 ledger lines, it gets a little hard to read, especially for sight reading. So I have this nice harmony thing now in maybe my viola section. So let's go ahead and copy this again, and let's go to the tenor clef. This is the tenor clef here. And the tenor clef has a movable middle C up here to the 4th line. We see this sometimes in cellos and trombones. Sometimes the music will feature tenor clef for those instruments, and it makes it pretty easy to write for this instrument as well with tenor clef. Now, this is getting a little bit high, but certainly playable for trombone players and especially cello players. But let's take them down a 5th. Let's see what that sounds like. All right, harmony isn't quite right there, but you get the idea. If I were to have this harmony part be in treble clef, way too many ledger lines. It just makes more sense. Could I put it in bass clef maybe? Let's see what it looks like in bass clef. Let's try that again. So I put this in bass clef. Okay, not too bad, certainly playable. One ledger line here. But if I want to keep it all on the staff, I can use tenor clef. Now, you might be saying, well, geez, why do I need to know alto and tenor clef? A, it's going to be on the AP Music Theory exam. They definitely are going to show you alto and tenor clef on this exam. But there's also some examples of it in other places. See if I can take you here to, here's a Bach viola concerto. And we can see right from the beginning, we have an alto clef. The composer, Bach, said, hey, I don't want to have some crazy ledger lines here. But as you see the piece goes through right there in bar number 2, it switches to treble clef for 3 notes, back to alto clef, and kind of moves back and forth as Bach is changing sort of the octave registers of this particular concerto. So that's not uncommon. Sometimes, you still see them, but it's more rare to see an entire piece in alto clef for viola. A lot of times they're switched back and forth. That instrument has a pretty wide range and can cover some lower notes that the violin doesn't cover to sort of fill out that orchestra, that viola, with that nice, dark resonance. And then if we go here and we look at, let's take a look at another piece. This is going to be, what is this? This is a concerto here for cello. And we can see this cello concerto is in tenor clef. And it switches to bass clef a couple of bars in and back to tenor clef. So just another example by Sanson, this excerpt from that piece of music. And so you will see these from time to time. You may be asked to write in these clefs from time to time in professional settings. And certainly you're going to need to know it for the AP test. So just know that where that C clef, where they come together, so the middle of the 3, that fancy looking 3, that's middle C. And then if you can just count up or down from there, D, E, F, G, A, and just understand the musical alphabet, you'll be able to find any note. You're going to have time. You don't have to necessarily sight read something like that, but you'll have to understand where those notes are on the staff. All right, we're going to come back for lesson number 2A here. We're going to talk about the grand staff. So tune in for that one coming up shortly. See you soon.